It is the day after Super Bowl 58, and we have a lot to dissect and talk about. If you watched the Super Bowl, you would know that there were two really good teams competing for the title, and we got a good game, which is all you can really ask for in any football game, I feel like. But let me tell you, one team is got to be feeling really bad right now with the way things turned out, and one team is going to be feeling really, really good. A win was at the top of their fingers, and it looked like they were actually going to complete their quest for six. But ultimately, they just fell up short. And we're going to talk about why that is today. But you are listening to the Ace Four Waves podcast with your host, me, Annabelle Schneider. And we are doing a Monday Reel today, which is a segment on the podcast where after a major championship game, we're going to talk about the game 24 hours or less after it happened. So you'll get a Monday Reel after the four major golf tournaments. You'll get a Monday Reel after the NCAA March Madness. You'll get one after the World Series, etc., so forth. But today's Monday Reel is all about the Super Bowl. And without getting too much into it, here's what you need to know. The 49ers and the Chiefs were playing in this game. It was a rematch of Super Bowl 54 that saw the Chiefs pull off a 21-point comeback win and end up winning the title. The 49ers in Super Bowl 54 had a 10-point lead, and they blew it. In Super Bowl 58, the Super Bowl this year, the 49ers once again had a 10-point lead, and it just fell from their reach once more. But congratulations to the Kansas City Chiefs for winning their third Super Bowl in 5 years. That's pretty impressive. They had an up and down regular season, so to overcome all of the adversity in their way and make a run in the postseason to become Super Bowl champs, major round of applause to them because they had a really great year, and it's quite the feat. The 49ers had a lead in 54 and 58, but blew it ultimately. Their fans felt like this was their year to win it, and it certainly felt that way for 3.5 quarters. But it also raises the question, if the 49ers have come so close, but they just can't finish the overall product. And we've had the same conversation with the Dallas Cowboys. They have a really great regular season record, but when the time comes, when the moment comes, they just come up short. That can be attributed to the head coach, his coaching style. That could be attributed to the players not being prepared. It could be just factors throughout the game that had an impact on the game. But we talked a lot about the Dallas Cowboys and coming up short and falling short of expectations. But we might also need to start having an honest conversation about the 49ers and their expectations and coming up short, because there is no reason why they should not have lost that game last night. We're going to talk game planning. We're going to talk missed opportunities and media tapes, what the media was saying about the game. We'll kind of get into that a little bit. I'm not going to have the GOAT debate on here because, number one, I feel like I can't provide some main point and then back it up with sufficient evidence. And that's not really what we're here to talk about today. So I'm going to leave the GOAT quarterback and debating up to you guys and to football analysts. They can pick apart the quarterback's games and so forth, but I'm not an expert in that area. So I can't really talk about something that I don't know much in without sounding like lost. So we're going to leave it up to the professionals. And from just a fan of football and podcaster, I'm going to do what I do best, which is just hopefully providing information and giving you some good stuff to listen to today or watch if you're watching this on YouTube. But here's the burning headline, which will be the central theme for today for my notes. It felt so wrong, but it felt so right, which is the title of the episode and the central theme we're going to all dive into right now. Now, the main point, it felt so wrong, starting with the 49ers. San Francisco should have been the ones holding up the Lombardi trophy at the end of the game. The win was in the foreseeable future for them, but it didn't happen. And this is a team that had one of the most explosive offenses in the entire National Football League. They had stars in Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey. They had defensive players in Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw, Nick Bosa, and Charvarius Ward. Everything was set in place for them to win and accomplish something they knew they could do, and they just couldn't capitalize on the opportunities during the game. The defense did a great job in the first half of that game, and let's think about that for a moment. They did not allow a single touchdown during the first half, and Kansas City had to settle for 2 field goals. They had Patrick Mahomes fighting for yards, but above all, they had a game plan ready. That was the main point that I brought up in my episode last week with my brother was Steve Wilks was going to be under the most pressure and the most fire coming into this game because of how his defense had played up to this point. They played the Green Bay Packers in the divisional round because they got that bye, so they didn't have to play the first round. They played the Green Bay Packers in the second round, the divisional round. They did not look great there. They should have lost to the Packers if Jordan Love hadn't thrown a game-ending interception at the end of the game. They were down 17 to the Detroit Lions. The Lions just ultimately gave that game away to them, but they did not look great against the Lions and stopping the run and having to go up against a good Kansas City team who can run the ball, throw the ball. It was all going to look like a recipe for disaster for that defense. Wilks had to fix what he needed to fix during this game, and that was fixing the run game. How do you stop the run with Isaiah Pacheco, with Patrick Mahomes? We know Mahomes can run the ball. You need to figure out a way to stop the run and hold them to as much, keeping Patrick Mahomes like tight and forcing him to throw the ball away and getting to the running back straight away in order to make big plays on the defensive side. And it worked. Kansas City scored 6 points in the first half. Steve Wilks did a tremendous job that first half. That defense looked the most ready out of all the units in football during that first half. The 49ers offense didn't look really great. The special teams later on didn't look great. The Kansas City offense and defense weren't really up to par. It was the San Francisco defense that was the highlight of the first half. And give credit to Steve Wilks for fixing what he said he would fix. I saw a lot more effort from those players because they knew the stakes and they knew how much that game meant to them at that moment. They made tackles. They forced Mahomes to make throws that were incomplete. They got an interception from Mahomes, which is something that we really hadn't seen from him in the postseason at that point. They got after the running back. They did everything that they did everything right, it felt like. But during the second half, they were gassed. They were tired by the end of regulation. The game went to overtime, and by then, I think that defense was just worn out, having to keep Mahomes and keep the Kansas City offense to little to no points. It took a lot out of them, but they came prepared. And the same cannot be said for the San Francisco offense or special teams. Steve Wiltz, as much as we might not want to hear it, Steve Wiltz was the best coach for the 49ers last night. It wasn't Kyle Shanahan and his offense and his play calling. It was not the special teams coach, which we'll talk about in a minute. It was Steve Wiltz and his defense who looked like the MVPs of the first half. And there's been a lot of heat directed at Kyle Shanahan and the quarterback who put his team in a position to score 3 times when it mattered most. And that same quarterback who everyone was against, who was called a lot of things, mainly a damn manager, who was told that he wasn't good enough to play in the NFL, who have media critics coming at him for his style of game, who everyone was rooting against. And he had an opportunity, and he gave his team multiple opportunities to try and win the game. He led his team down the field for potential touchdowns. They did have to settle for field goals, but he did lead a touchdown drive to Juwan Jennings, which put them up, I believe. And all the defense had to do was just hold Patrick Mahomes in that Chiefs offense to either a field goal or force them to go 3 and out. He led his offense during the final 2 minutes of the fourth quarter and in overtime, but he still got his team in a position to win. And you can't say that for a lot of quarterbacks in this league. You can see quarterbacks go at the end of the game and either see something like what Jordan Love did, for example. He gave his team an opportunity to go and try and win the game. Ultimately, he did end up throwing an interception that costed them. You saw Jared Goff try to lead his team down the field for a potential game winner. That came up short too, going for it on 4th down, which caused a lot of media outrage from the head coach, directed towards the head coach. But I can't say, I don't have any room to talk about that, but Brock Purdy put his team in a position to go and win, but it just wasn't enough. And in overtime, they did have to settle for a field goal. He did have some receivers open for a touchdown, but there was a lot of blitz coming right at him, and I don't think he saw his open receivers happening in real time. When you slow it down in slow motion on the replay and on tape, you can see that the receivers are getting open, but by the time he's releasing the ball, he has a person directly in his face, and he has no choice but to just throw it to one of the receivers and hope that they make a play. There likely would not have been an overtime game. We're going to talk about another point, the special teams downfall. There likely would not have been an overtime game if Ray McCloud hadn't watched a football directly hit one of his players' feet and then make a lazy attempt at trying to recover that ball. If you know, the Kansas City was punting the ball away. So Ray McCloud, the receiver for the 49ers, like the kick returner in a way, was getting ready to go either return the ball or just wave it off, call a fair catch, and then play it from where it lies or where it bounces. The ball hit the back of one of the 49ers players' feet, which is allowed in the NFL. The ball can hit another person's like body part, but when that happens, if it does, that means that they technically called a fair catch. So that means the ball is already eligible to be picked up and returned, or picked up. If you're Ray McCloud, you can pick it up and try to recover it, and that's where the ball is laid. I don't think that the player it bounced off of knew it, but Ray McCloud was already in position to call fair catch. Once it did hit the back of his heel, he scrambled to try and get the ball, but it just wasn't enough. and he kind of fumbled with the ball too in a little bit trying to pick it up. So you can see him if you watch that play of the game. You can see he's trying to pick up the ball, but I don't think either his hands were really slippery, the ball slippery, or he was just very out of control with it. And that set up Kansas City for an opportunity to score on offense, and they did. The last drive by the Chiefs at the end of regulation should have been played for a touchdown and a game winner. It should have the Kansas City defense could have helped try to hold them back from scoring the touchdown. They could have been playing, they could have been protecting downfield instead of having to play up front if Jake Moody had made a PAT. He had a missed extra point, and that could have, this game could have and should have been over if he had made that extra point. If he makes it, the 49ers are up by 4, and the defense is focused on not letting the Chiefs get a touchdown to potentially seal the deal. Because he missed that extra point, the 49ers were only up by 3, and Kansas City went ahead and scored a field goal. If they were up by 4, just think about this in context for a minute. If your team is up by 4 points and it's the last like 5-6 minutes of the game, you're up by 4. You know that the opposing team can kick a field goal, but they would still be down. So that opposing team is trying to score a touchdown to either win the game or send the game into overtime. Up by 4 means that you can have your defense protecting downfield. You can have your safeties and maybe linebackers, depending on how you want to call the play and organize it. You can have your safeties lining up and covering the wide receivers. You can be guarding them man on man so that they don't have an opportunity to go down the field and make a play. You can be guarding them there. You can have all your defensive backs, defensive ends, maybe your linebackers trying to either bring some pressure to the quarterback, or if it's a run play, you can bring them all in to stop the run and hold them to either a 3 and out, or in worst case scenario, worst/best case scenario, if that doesn't work out, you can hold them and try to force them to make a long field goal, which would still put you in position to win if they kick a field goal and then you're up by 1. Because of the missed PAT, though, that meant that the 49ers were up just by 3. So that gave Kansas City great field position and a great opportunity to go tie the game or win the game. Ultimately, they ended up tying the game, which sent the game to overtime. But here, we need to talk about another thing, though, that happened to the 49ers and what went wrong. We talked about the special teams with McLeod's fumble, with Moody's extra point miss, but not to take away anything negative about Jake Moody, but he did make a 55-yard field goal as a rookie kicker, which was the longest field goal made in Super Bowl history up until Harrison Butker made a 57-yard field goal in the same game. So that record belongs to Butker instead of Moody. But Moody did make a 55-yarder. He did make a 53-yarder. I think he made another field goal. So the field goal percentages were there, but the extra point was blocked. And that was just one of the many reasons why the 49ers were sent to an overtime game, and very well could have also been the sole reason why they lost. Another reason that the 49ers might have lost, which was on the first opening drive of the game, that we need to talk about, the CMC fumble. The 49ers had the ball to start first on offense, and they were looking pretty good on their opening drive. And when you're going up against the Chiefs team with a good defense and an even better offense, the mentality needs to be score right away, whether that be scoring a field goal or scoring a touchdown. A touchdown is more points, as you all know. So touchdown would have been awesome, but a field goal would be good too. You're putting up points on the board, which is what you want. The 49ers were in a position where they looked like they were going to score right away. But inside of the Chiefs' 35, 40-yard line, CMC had the ball to run. He ended up fumbling it, and it was recovered by the Chiefs. And to be fair, that fumble did not end up hurting them because the Chiefs got the ball. They went 3 and out on that drive too. So it wasn't really like a loss for the 49ers in a way. It didn't cost them any points for the Chiefs. It didn't really hurt them in that moment. But when you look at the whole game overall and what they could have done differently and what should have went differently, that fumble was a game changer. If CMC had just held on to that ball and kept it a little more secure, I really do believe that the 49ers were going to score on that opening drive. Now, would that have been a touchdown? That's hard to say and that's hard to predict, but at the very least, they could have settled for a field goal, whether it be from like 30, 40, or 50 yards. We all know that Jake Moody is capable of making those, with the exception of the missed field goal against the Browns. But that was outdoors. This was inside Alliance Stadium, home of the Las Vegas Raiders. So they had an indoor facility. So weather was really not going to be an issue for field goals and extra points. And that fumble, like I said, costed them anywhere between 3 and 7 points. And because they were looking good, they were moving the ball down the field with little to no air, and they had so much momentum on their side, only to lose that to a fumble. And I believe that was one of McCaffrey's first fumbles in the postseason, if I'm not mistaken. The missed kick, had the 49ers up by 3 instead of 4. Add that with the fumble by CMC, with the fumble by Raymond McLeod. Those were all really unfortunate timing events. But some of that can be directed to the special teams coordinator. I know that the special teams coach can't really be blamed for missing an extra point that's on the kicker, but you should know to tell your guys that if there's a punt and you're trying to return for a punt and it hits a player, go and recover the ball right away. Just don't stand there and watch it happen and then try to make a play seconds later. You need to be able to make that play right then, right now. And Ray's kind of delayed timing also hurt them. I talked a little bit about the Chiefs' defense not being good at being able to stop a run. That can be said for the 49ers defense as well. But there was a non-existent run game in the third quarter. The 49ers had some success with running the ball with CMC in the first half, but at the start of the third quarter, that just all vanished. It went away completely. And could that have been in part to the CMC fumble earlier on in the game? Maybe. And not wanting to risk like another turnover or something else happening. That's hard to say too. But you have one of the best running backs in the entire league. At worst case, put Elijah Mitchell in for CMC if you didn't trust him in that moment. Get him to make a play. Mitchell had some carries for a couple of yards, but Debo also had some carries for a couple of yards too. Use Debo as a running back option if you didn't trust McCaffrey. Use Elijah Mitchell in that case. But there was almost little to no run game in the third quarter, which was the same narrative that we talked about with Kyle Shanahan in Super Bowl 54. He took away the run. He relied a lot on passing, which Jimmy threw 2 interceptions when they were calling passing plays that costed them there. I believe that the 49ers called 8 straight passing plays in the start of the third quarter to 1 rushing play. and those 8 straight passing attempts led to 2 3-and-outs back-to-back. The run game for the 49ers was not there, and that just falls on the offensive coordinator in that way. Even if your running back got 2 or 3 yards, whether that be McCaffrey, whether that would be Elijah Mitchell, whether that be Deebo Samuel, if you're utilizing him, you're still extending plays. And if McCaffrey wasn't the right guy at the moment, substitute another guy in. See if he can make a play. When you're passing, you're eating time off the clock. When you run the ball, you're getting more yards. At least you're still moving the ball forward instead of throwing an incomplete pass and then having to make up for more yards. But they had the ball multiple times. They just brought through it to receivers. They just couldn't get open. And credit the Kansas City defense for holding that offense to less than 25 points. That's also kind of really impressive. You can point fingers, I feel like, at who's more to blame. You can point fingers at the head coach for blowing yet another lead. In a way, you could point fingers at the quarterback, who did not really do anything wrong. And I think what some people tend to forget is this is a second-year quarterback in the NFL who is in his first full season as a starter for the 49ers. He is 24 years old, and he led his team to 2 NFC championships back-to-back. The first championship game, he hurt his throwing elbow, required surgery, he tore his UCL, and then came back this season not knowing if he was going to play or not. And then he led his team to a Super Bowl this year, all under the age of 25. It's okay to say that he's not fully developed yet, and not many players are in their second year. You can usually by year 3 or 4, you can fully understand where a player is at their game based on their performance over the years. He's a young quarterback with so much potential, and he has proven to a lot of people that he has that mentality to go and win the game. But people love to hate on him or come at him just because of his star talented roster around him. But what we tend to forget is every team has good players. Like every quarterback has players that they can throw to or give the ball to go and make a play. Mahomes has good players. Dak Prescott has good players. Josh Allen has great players. Jalen Hurts has great players. Joe Burrow has great players. Tua has good players. Every team will have really good, not really, I could say really good. Every team will have good running backs. They'll have good wide receivers, and they'll have good tight ends. In the 49ers case, they also have a really good fullback who can play a tight end position, a wide receiver position, basically anywhere he's needed to be. And some teams have fullbacks. Not all teams do have fullbacks, but when you have a fullback, I feel like you're always at a great advantage because you can use that player in almost stick him anywhere, and you can trust him to make a play. That's just the way it goes sometimes. I'll tell you an issue for Purdy last night. It was his offensive line. The O-line who gave up pressure and forced Purdy to throw the ball quicker than he was anticipating and before he could make his read. They didn't do a good job at guarding Chris Jones and keeping him from going after the quarterback, keeping him intact from going after the quarterback. That might be a concern this offseason for the 49ers is addressing the offensive line struggles because they have not looked good all season. This was not just a one-time thing where the O-line was going up against a really good Kansas City defense. The O-line has been talked about and have been struggling for a majority of the season. Let's see. So the next point here. And we also have to acknowledge, skip ahead a little bit. Here we go. It felt so right. We're done talking about the 49ers for now. Let's talk about the Chiefs. We talked about how it felt so wrong for the 49ers. Some things just did not go their way, and some things were just out of their control. It felt so wrong, and I know that they were really hoping to bring home their sixth Lombardi when all the potential and all the momentum, all the hype was right there for them. But here's why it felt so right for the Chiefs. The Chiefs were chasing back-to-back titles, something that hadn't been done in almost 15 years back when Tom Brady and the New England Patriots did it. And after a pretty mediocre regular season, the Chiefs lost on Christmas Day to the Raiders. They lost more regular season games. The start of the season, they did not start off strong, but they figured out how to change that, and heading into the postseason, making their postseason run up to the Super Bowl, they were the hottest team by far. Mahomes was clutch when it mattered most, and the defense did a great job at handling the 49ers offense. And we also have to acknowledge the fact that if we can say that one quarterback didn't play a perfect game and didn't play maybe to the standards that was set for them, we have to keep that same energy when we're talking about the other quarterback. And here's the deal. Brock Purdy did not play a perfect game. He did not really have a great game, but Mahomes did not have a perfect game or a great game either. Purdy did miss throws to his wide receivers, like we alluded to. He did have Brandon Ayuk open for a touchdown on the first drive of overtime. They had to settle for a field goal. I don't think he saw Ayuk open when he made his throw because he was being pressured from Chris Jones at the moment. I don't think he had the read necessarily in the right position to make. So he just had to throw it and hope that someone would either catch it or take the incomplete pass on 3rd and 4. But he did not have any interceptions. He was not responsible for the fumbles by both CMC and Ray McLeod. Mahomes threw an interception in the first half. He wasn't perfect. He looked tight during the game at times, and his own run game was nearly shut down. I didn't talk about this, but the 49ers defense did a great job at stopping Isaiah Pacheco and the Kansas City Chiefs run game. I honestly felt like they did better stopping the run than the Chiefs did at stopping CMC. He did not look great consistently, talking about Mahomes. He did not look great consistently at all during all 4 quarters, all 4 phases of the game, but he's going to get praised because he got his team points when it mattered. In crunch time, he delivered a game-winning touchdown, and he won a Super Bowl. That's not to take away anything from what Mahomes accomplished and did this season. Mahomes had a great year. There's a reason why he's being talked about in the, GOAT category with Tom Brady and a few other quarterbacks. There's a reason why he's so special to this Chiefs team. He can make deep passes. He can run the ball. He can find ways to get the ball out in time, trust his receivers or his running backs to make a play. That's ultimately how you win games, when you trust all the players around you. Brock has great players around him, surrounding him also. I just think the Chiefs defense figured out what they needed to fix during halftime. They made those adjustments. That's kind of why the 49ers looked a little bit more tight in the third quarter. They were held to 0 points in the third quarter. Fourth quarter, they had to settle for field goals. I do believe the touchdown came in the fourth quarter from Purdy to Jawan Jennings, which put them up again, missed extra point. Those are all really unfortunate stuff that happens. But here's where the Chiefs offense, here's where the Chiefs offense kind of got their first lucky, I won't say lucky break, but here's where it all started to go kind of in their direction. It started when Dre Greenlaw, one of the 49ers' best defensive players, went out with an Achilles injury during the first or second possession of the game. He was running onto the field. He hurt his lower leg, they said on television. It was confirmed later on that he had an Achilles injury, and at the end of the game, he was seen in a boot on crutches towards Achilles. I don't think the 49ers defense was really anticipating that happening. And with Dre Greenlaw came up with 2 big interceptions against the Packers. He's a really great football player. I don't know why he hasn't been named to Pro Bowls or All Pro, because he really is a great defensive player, and losing him was massive. His replacement was Oren Burks, and during the third and fourth quarter, the Chiefs used that to their advantage. They were attacking Oren Burks putting good receivers against him, knowing that he's not really good at man coverage like Dre Greenlaw is, and it worked. Burks, let's see, I have some stats here that I was going to read. If I can find it. Yeah. I think Oren Burks had like 113 rating against him when he was trying to go man to man against receivers. So that means Patrick Mahomes had a really great QBR and a really great passer rating when throwing to receivers who Oren Burks was either supposed to be defending or covering. He was not great. He was not a great substitute for Dre Greenlaw. Had Dre Greenlaw been in his starting place, if Greenlaw hadn't torn his Achilles, maybe the 49ers would have ended up winning too. And that's hard to tell. Here's some stats before I get on to my second point that I want to make. I'm just going to read some stats from the game to kind of put this game into context. So Brock Purdy was 23 of 38, threw for 255 yards and 1 touchdown to Jennings. Jennings, believe it or not, was actually a quarterback in high school, got recruited to play quarterback in college. He switched to a wide receiver kind of position in college, but Juwan Jennings threw the first touchdown pass of the game to CMC. Patrick Mahomes was 34 of 46 for 333 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. One of those touchdowns came in overtime to win the Super Bowl, but he also threw 1 interception. Christian McCaffrey, 22 carries, 80 yards, but he had 8 receptions for 88 yards, 1 touchdown, and then 1 fumble. And let's think about that too. 22 carries. With a player like him, you would expect that he would have 30. He should have had 30 carries for over 100 yards if they had stuck to that run game and that run offense in the third quarter. But it was not there. Travis Kelce, 9 receptions for 93 yards. CMC was averaging 3.6 yards per carry, and he was held to under 100 rushing yards. He did fumble the ball, like we talked about. Brandon Ayuk had 3 receptions for 49 yards, which is a 16.3 average yards per reception. Kyle Juszczyk, the 49ers fullback, had 2 receptions for 31 yards, but they didn't use him much in the game, aside from a catch during the first opening drive, and then arguably a game-saving catch that set them up for a field goal in overtime. So he did have some crucial moments. I don't think they utilized him as well as they could have. Jawan Jennings might have been the best player for the 49ers outside of their quarterback. 4 receptions for 42 yards. He threw a touchdown and he also caught a touchdown. He was by far one of their best players last night on both sides of the team, both sides of the ball and on both teams. Jawan Jennings could have been Super Bowl MVP and he would have deserved that, rightfully so. Dre Greenlaw tore his Achilles running onto the field and was carted off by the end of the first quarter. Kind of talked about that too. Fred Warner led the defense with 9 tackles and 4 assists, whereas Nick Bosa had 4 tackles and 2 assists. Fred Warner was one of the better players on defense last night. Again, playing with hunger. He knew what the game meant to him. He was doing everything in his power to go and set his team up for success. Before the game, here are some X factors, kind of what Michael and I talked about last weekend. Before the game, the 49ers defensive X factors to me were Dre Greenlaw and Jair Brown. Dre Greenlaw, obviously with Greenlaw, got injured, really unfortunate for him. Jair Brown did get that interception against Mahomes, and I would say he was okay during the game. He wasn't really the best at protecting man coverage and defending the players that he was supposed to defend, but he is a rookie too. He's going to get better as the seasons go on, but I feel like he's a real special asset to the 49ers defensively. After the game, the X factor was Diamador Lenore, a guy that we haven't really talked about much. Lenore had 4 tackles and he had 4 assists. He was one of the better defensive players last night outside of Fred Warner and Nick Bosa, maybe. Before the game, I said that the 49ers X factor was Brandon Ayuk because the Chiefs were more than likely going to be figuring out ways to stop and guard George Kittle, CMC, Deebo Samuel. Sometimes the Chiefs might forget that Brandon Ayuk is a real threat on offense. Ayuk did have 42 receiving yards, but after the game, the X factor was Jawan Jennings. Receiving touchdown, he threw a touchdown. He had about over 40 yards. He had 3 receptions for 47 yards, I believe. I also say that another X factor after the game was Kyle Juszczyk, once again, coming up with a big play during the opening drive. Ultimately, that didn't really count for anything, but if he hadn't caught that and made the play, the 49ers were likely looking at a punt situation in that moment. Before the game, the Chiefs' offensive X factor was Isaiah Pacheco for the reason that the 49ers defense was not good at stopping a run. So if they could get Pacheco going on offense, kind of weaving through the holes of the 49ers defense, that was going to be a big play and a big momentum in the game. After the game, their offensive X factor was Mecole Hardman Jr. 3 receptions for 57 yards and a touchdown, which was the game-winning touchdown. Defensively, the X factor for the Chiefs was Trent McDuffie. He was good this game, but after the game, that X factor was Chris Jones, 2 tackles, 2 assists, but was great at coverage and was great at bringing pressure to the quarterback. And when you set up one of the best Chiefs defensive players in Chris Jones against an inexperienced right line consisting of John Feliciano and Colin McKivitz, that's just a recipe for disaster at that point. And that is what happened. The 49ers rushing yards. Here's a stat. The 49ers rushing yards equaled 110 total yards. CMC had 80 yards. Elijah Mitchell had a couple of rushing yards. Deebo Samuel had some rushing yards. Brock Purdy ran for 12 rushing yards. So they had 110 overall yards, which their CMC averages nearly 100 rushing yards per game. Add that to Brock running a few times, giving it to Elijah Mitchell and Deebo Samuel for a few carries. They should have been either in the 150 or the 160 rushing yards, but they were held to 110, which credit to the Kansas City defense again for that. The Chiefs rushing yards equaled 130. I think the 49ers defense in the first half did a great job at containing and limiting Isaiah Pacheco, but in the fourth quarter, the run game for the Chiefs just got going. Steve Wilks prepared his defense up until the very end of where they couldn't stop Mahomes and the Chiefs during the last play of regulation and in overtime. And Kyle Shanahan prepared his offense to little to no avail, which was, again, going back to coaching. Steve Wilks came prepared. I don't know if we can say the same thing about Kyle Shanahan. And last main point for the Chiefs, the overtime mistake. So the NFL changed the rules for a Super Bowl. Just making sure I have enough time here for my limits on the podcast on Spotify. The overtime rule is now for a Super Bowl. You can go to overtime if it's the game ends in regulation and they're all tied up. You have to go to overtime because you need to have a winner. That's just the way football and sports works in general. But whoever gets the ball first can go down the field. You don't really start at a specific yardage like in college football. If you go to overtime, sometimes you'll start at the 25-yard line. Then you have opportunities to score there. But it's like a new game, which is what the broadcaster said. It's like a new game. So the opposing team will kick the ball away. You can either run it or call for a catch, whatever that may look like. But you have pretty much a fresh opportunity to go down the field and score. But if you score a field goal, which is what the 49ers ended up doing, if you get the ball first, if you elect to have the ball first, you can go down the field, you can get a field goal, but that's not the end of the game. The opposing team then has the chance to get the ball back and make a run of their own. If they kick a field goal, then we go to double overtime, which is where the first team who scores wins. But if the Chiefs score a touchdown, which is what they did, they end up winning because 7 is more than 3 and vice versa. And Kyle Shanahan came under a lot of fire for electing to have the ball first. And I think one of the best arguments I saw for that is if you let the Chiefs offense on the field first, you can kind of see what you're looking for. Maybe the defense can hold them to a field goal at best. And then that sets you up to go down the field and either tie the game again or potentially win the game. But what we also have to consider is that defense looked exhausted by the end of regulation. And the Chiefs had the ball during the last minute of the fourth quarter. So you're basically asking the defense, after they held them to a field goal, you're asking them to go back on the field again when they were just on it and try and make a stop. I don't really blame Kyle Shanahan for electing to put his offense out there first. They did have more rest than that defense, but if you also have the ball to start in overtime, if it does go to a second overtime, worst case scenario, you have the ball first. That gives you the opportunity to go and score first and win the game. So I don't blame him for choosing to receive the ball first. I think that they were really hoping to get a good opportunity look for a touchdown. Again, I think it was right there, but with the pass protection with the offensive line, Brock just didn't see his receivers, but he could have had 2 of them wide open for a touchdown and held the Chiefs and forced the Chiefs to either kick a field goal or at worst send it to a double overtime where they would have had the ball to start again and could have put that game away for good. And that will do it for this episode today. Thanks for listening and for watching and for letting me talk about my thoughts of the game. I know it might be getting really dark in here now. That's because my blinds are closed. I tried to figure out good ways to do lighting, but if I had opened up the blinds, I was gonna be looking at direct sunlight. And it was just gonna be really, really bright. So we had to close the blinds, and luckily, there is some faint light coming in, and we're not in the complete dark, but it's getting kind of late now, and the sun's starting to go down. And like I said, these are both really good teams. It was a closer game than most were probably anticipating, which makes for good football and good television. The loss is going to hurt the 49ers for a while, I believe, and they had it, but it just got away from them. They had a wonderful season, and there's so much potential for this team moving forward. It's not the end of the world for them. I do think we'll see them in another Super Bowl soon. I do believe we'll see them in another NFC championship game soon with their quarterback. I know this off season there's going to be a lot of attention. What players do they keep? What players do they not resign? A lot of players are going into free agency. We'll see how that goes. And the Chiefs are doing what no other team is doing in the NFL right now. They are Super Bowl champs again for a reason. And with that, thanks for listening and tuning in to the Ace for Waves podcast. And I'll catch you on the next episode. See you then.